The air in the mine was heavy, filled with dust that clung to skin and burned in the lungs. The girl's hands were rough, torn from years of scraping at the stone walls. She moved like a shadow, quiet, thin, and almost invisible. Her body was weak, but she did not stop working. The guards did not allow weakness. If someone slowed down, a whip cracked against their back, or worse, they were dragged away and never seen again. The girl had learned long ago not to cry. Tears did not save anyone. They only brought more pain. Every day was the same. Chains around her ankles rattled as she carried heavy rocks. She could not remember the last time she had seen the sun. Her world was darkness, smoke, and screams. Once, she had been a child who dreamed of stars. Now she was only a number to the guards, just another slave to break. Her back bent under the weight of the stones, but she kept moving. To stop was death. Her heart had grown quiet, but somewhere inside, a tiny spark still remained. She did not know it yet, but that spark was waiting for someone to touch it. Her body trembled as she lifted a chunk of ore onto a cart. She staggered and nearly fell. A guard barked something in a cruel voice, raising his whip, but another slave stepped forward to take the load before the strike came. The girl lowered her head. She did not thank him. No one thanked anyone in this place. Gratitude was dangerous. The guards could use it against you, so she stayed silent, eyes to the ground, and moved on. That night, after hours of endless work, her body gave up. She collapsed in the tunnel, the cold rock pressing against her face. Her breath came short and sharp. She waited for the whip, for the shouting. Instead, she heard laughter. The guards walked past, shaking their heads. Another broken one muttered in a language she barely understood. They left her there. In the mines, the weak were not worth beating. They were left to die. She lay there, her vision fading. For the first time in years, she almost welcomed the darkness. Maybe it was better to let go, better to sleep and not wake up in this nightmare. Her body was heavy, her chains cold. She closed her eyes, thinking this was the end. Then a sound reached her ears. Different footsteps echoed in the tunnel. They were slow, careful, not like the harsh march of guards. She forced her eyes open. A figure stood over her. At first, she thought it was another slave, but then she saw his face. His skin was different, his eyes sharper, his body strange. She had heard whispers of them, humans, but she had never seen one up close. He knelt beside her. His hands were rough but gentle as he turned her over. She tried to push him away, too afraid to trust. No one in this place helped anyone else. But he did not leave. He looked into her eyes and spoke softly. She did not understand all of his words, but one sentence reached her heart clearly. "You're not broken." The words hit her harder than any whip. Not broken? She wanted to laugh, but no sound came. She was nothing but broken. She was scars, dust, and chains. Yet the way he said it, firm and certain, made her chest ache. She had not heard kindness in years. No one had looked at her like that. For a moment, she forgot the pain and simply stared at him. He offered her water from a hidden flask. She hesitated. Taking food or water from another could mean punishment, but his eyes did not shift away. He waited, patient. Finally, her cracked lips touched the flask, and cool water slid down her throat. It felt like fire and life all at once. She coughed, choking, but drank again. For the first time in so long, her body remembered what hope tasted like. The human glanced toward the shadows, listening for guards. Then he leaned close, whispering something she could not fully understand. But she caught one word: tomorrow. His voice carried a promise. She did not know what he meant. Tomorrow in this place usually meant another day of chains. But his eyes told her something different, something dangerous, something impossible. She watched him walk away, blending back into the line of workers. He did not look back, but she could still feel the warmth of his presence. Her body ached, her wounds burned, but her heart beat faster. For the first time in years, she did not want to let go. For the first time in years, she wanted to see what tomorrow meant. She lay awake in the dark long after the others had fallen into restless sleep. Every sound made her flinch. She half expected the guards to return, to drag her away for daring to drink his water. But the night passed, and nothing happened. The memory of his words echoed in her mind. Not broken. The phrase repeated again and again, like a song she had once known but forgotten. It gave her strength she did not recognize. Her hands shook as she touched the cold chains around her wrists. They were real, heavy, unbreakable. Yet somehow they felt lighter than before. She could not explain why. Maybe it was because for the first time someone had seen her, not as a slave, not as a tool, but as something more. She was afraid, yes, terrified. But deep inside, where the guards could not reach, a flame had flickered back to life. The girl closed her eyes again, but this time she did not welcome death. This time she dreamed. She dreamed of sunlight. She dreamed of running without chains. She dreamed of tomorrow. And in her dream, a human walked beside her, strong and steady, whispering again, "You're not broken." The next day began like every other day in the mines, but something felt different to the girl. Her body was weak, her arms shook from lifting heavy rocks, but her heart beat faster than usual. She kept stealing glances at the human. He worked a little farther down the tunnel, carrying loads heavier than his frame seemed built for. His face was set in determination, sweat dripping down his neck, but his eyes moved toward her whenever he thought no one noticed. She pretended not to see, afraid the guards might catch the exchange. Yet inside, a strange warmth spread through her chest, a warmth she had not felt for years. At the midday break, when most of the slaves collapsed to the ground in silence, he appeared at her side again. He knelt as if checking a crack in the stone wall, his body shielding her from the guards' eyes. From under his shirt, he pulled a small piece of bread. It was stale, dry, and no bigger than her hand, but to her it looked like treasure. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. If the guards saw, both of them would be punished. She shook her head quickly, whispering hoarsely, "No, no." But he simply placed the bread in her hand and closed her fingers around it. His hand was warm against her cold skin. For a moment she froze, trembling, staring at the bread. Hunger gnawed at her belly like fire. She wanted to throw it away, to run, but her body betrayed her. She lifted the bread to her mouth and took a bite. The taste was dry, but her eyes filled with tears as it melted on her tongue. She chewed slowly, afraid the moment might vanish like smoke. "Eat," he whispered, his voice low, almost urgent. She obeyed, hiding the rest under her sleeve, eating piece by piece when no one looked. Every bite was life. Every bite was dangerous. She wanted to ask him why he would risk this, but her throat closed with fear. In this place, questions were dangerous too. As the day wore on, she found her gaze drawn back to him again and again. He worked hard, harder than most humans she had heard about in stories. His movements were strong, not just from muscle, but from something inside him that did not bend. When a guard shouted at him, he did not shrink back the way others did. He bowed his head just enough to avoid punishment, but his eyes never lost their fire. She could not understand him fully, but she could feel it. He was different. That night, when the slaves were herded back into the sleeping chambers, she found him waiting near the shadows. The chamber was a hollow cave, damp and filled with the smell of sweat and fear. Everyone collapsed onto the ground, too tired to speak. But as she lowered herself, she noticed him moving closer. Her heart pounded. If the guards saw them whisper, it would mean death. Still, he leaned toward her, his lips close to her ear. "You are safe," he whispered. She blinked at him, confused. Safe? Nothing in this place was safe. She wanted to laugh, but instead she found her throat burning. She wanted to believe him, even if it was impossible. She shook her head, whispering back, "Not safe. Never safe." But he smiled faintly, his eyes steady. "With me, safe." The words were broken, but she understood. She stared at him in silence, her chest aching. No one had ever said such words to her. The next few days were filled with quiet exchanges. A sip of water here, a piece of food there. He always found ways to shield her from the guard's eyes, using his body as cover, pretending to tie chains or move rocks. She began to wait for his small kindnesses, even though every moment terrified her. For years, she had survived by staying invisible, by being nothing. Now she felt seen, and it scared her more than the whips. One evening, while they were loading carts, she stumbled under the weight of a large stone. The guard's whip cracked through the air, ready to strike her. But before the lash could land, the human stepped between them, grabbing the stone from her arms as if it were his own burden. The whip froze midair. The guard narrowed his eyes, suspicious, but said nothing. The human bent his back, carrying the stone away, leaving her standing frozen in shock. Her heart thundered. Why had he done that? Why risk punishment for her? As she watched him, sweat dripping from his brow, she realized she could no longer pretend he was just another worker. He was risking his life for her, again and again. Something inside her chest stirred, a feeling she did not have a name for. That night, she could not sleep. She lay on the cold ground, staring at the ceiling of the cavern. Every sound echoed around her: the rattling of chains, the soft moans of the sick, the coughs of the weak. Yet her mind was elsewhere. She replayed the moment he had taken the stone from her. She remembered the heat of his hand when he pressed bread into hers. She remembered his whisper, "With me, safe." A tear slipped down her cheek. She had not cried in years, not since the day she was taken from her family. Tears were weakness, and weakness was punished. But now the tears came silently, not from pain, but from something new. She hugged her knees to her chest, shaking, and for the first time since she could remember, she wanted to live. But in the back of her mind, fear gnawed at her. The guards were not fools. They noticed everything. Sooner or later, they would see. Sooner or later, they would punish. She looked across the chamber at the human. He was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling just like her. His eyes flicked to hers for a brief second, and in that second, she felt the world shift. She should have looked away. She should have closed her heart again, locked it tight. But she couldn't. She held his gaze just for a moment before turning quickly to hide the heat rising in her chest. She knew it was dangerous. She knew this kindness might kill them both. But deep down, for the first time in her life, she was willing to take that risk. The morning began with shouting. The guards stormed into the tunnels, their boots echoing against the stone walls. The slaves quickly lined up, heads lowered, afraid to meet their eyes. The girl stood among them, trembling. Her body was still sore from the night before, but she forced herself to remain still. Any sign of weakness meant pain. Her chains rattled as she shifted her weight, and she prayed the guards would pass her by. One of the guards paced in front of the line, his whip curled in his hand like a hungry snake. His eyes scanned the workers, looking for the smallest mistake. When his gaze landed on the girl, her heart dropped. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. She tried to shrink into herself, but the chain on her ankles kept her rooted. The guard barked something in his harsh tongue and pointed at the cart she was supposed to load. It was heavier than anything she could carry. She knew it the moment her eyes fell on it. Her legs shook as she bent down and wrapped her thin arms around the rock. She lifted with all her strength, but her knees buckled. The rock slipped from her grasp, crashing back to the ground. The guard's face twisted in anger. Without hesitation, he raised his whip high into the air. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the sharp pain she knew so well. But the pain never came. Instead, she heard a heavy thud. She opened her eyes and saw the human standing in front of her. His back was turned to her, his body blocking the whip. The leather lash hung across his shoulder, red already forming on his skin where it had struck. The guard froze, stunned. For a moment, the entire tunnel seemed silent. No one ever blocked the whip. No one ever dared to stand against the guards. The human's shoulders were tense, his fists clenched at his sides. He slowly turned his head, his eyes locking on the guard. There was no fear in them. His voice came out rough but strong. Enough. The guard's face darkened with fury. He lifted the whip again, ready to strike harder this time, but the human did not move. He stood tall, staring the guard down, his jaw set. The girl stared at him, her heart racing. She could not believe what she was seeing. This was madness. Challenging a guard meant death. Yet he stood there, silent, unshaken. The other guards moved closer, uncertain. They whispered among themselves, surprised by his defiance. Slaves did not fight back. Slaves bent and obeyed. But here was a human refusing to bow. The air grew tense, thick with danger. The girl's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to pull him back, to beg him to stop before he was killed, but her voice refused to leave her mouth. The guard shouted, his whip cracking through the air again. This time, the human caught it mid-swing. The leather burned against his palm, but he did not let go. The guard pulled, snarling, but the human yanked harder, ripping the whip from his hand. The sound of the leather falling onto the ground echoed louder than the mining carts. Every slave in the tunnel gasped. The human threw the whip to the floor and stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the guard. For the first time, the guard took a step back. Fear flickered across his face, just for a moment. It was small, but the girl saw it. Her eyes widened. She had never seen a guard afraid. Not of anyone, and certainly not of a slave. The girl's chest tightened, her mind racing. This was impossible. This was suicide. And yet something deep inside her stirred. A strange, dangerous feeling. Hope. The guard growled, shoving the human hard in the chest, but the human didn't fall. He stood his ground, breathing heavily, his eyes burning with fire. "No more," he said again, his voice echoing through the cavern. The words were simple, but the weight behind them shook everyone. Another guard stepped forward, hand on his weapon, but hesitated. The slaves were watching. The moment was fragile, dangerous. If they struck him down now, it might spark a riot. The overseers did not want that. They thrived on fear, and right now, fear was shifting. The human finally turned his head slightly, just enough to look at the girl behind him. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, and she realized something that made her knees weak. He had done this for her. Every lash he had taken, every word of defiance, every risk, it was all to protect her. She stared at his back, her chest rising and falling rapidly. For years, she had seen only cruelty in this place. For years, she had believed no one cared if she lived or died. But here he was, standing between her and the whip, unafraid, unbroken. The guards eventually stepped back, muttering among themselves, trying to decide what to do. The whip remained on the ground, and no one dared to pick it up. The human bent down, lifted the heavy rock the girl had dropped, and carried it to the cart. His muscles strained, his body shook with pain from the lash marks. But he did not stop. He placed the rock into the cart and returned to the line of slaves as if nothing had happened. The girl's hands shook as she tried to steady herself. She could still hear his words in her head. Enough. They echoed in her chest like a heartbeat. She knew the danger was not over. The guards would not forget. They would punish him later, in the shadows where no one could see. But right now, all she could feel was awe. That night, when they were sent back to the sleeping chambers, she kept her eyes on him. He lay against the wall, his back bleeding from the whip, his face pale from exhaustion. Yet his expression was calm, steady. She wanted to crawl to him, to whisper her thanks, but fear held her back. Words were dangerous here. Gratitude was dangerous. Still, as she lay in the dark, staring at him across the chamber, one truth filled her heart. For the first time, she did not feel like a slave. For the first time, she believed the guards could be resisted. And for the first time, she thought maybe she was not as broken as she had always believed. The tunnels were quiet after the last shift. Most slaves lay in corners, their bodies too tired to move, their eyes blank with exhaustion. The girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring into the dark. The ache in her back and arms was constant, but her thoughts were louder than the pain. She kept replaying the moment when the human had stood against the guard. His voice, his eyes, his defiance, it all felt impossible, like a dream she should not believe. Yet she could not forget. When the guards left the chamber for their patrol, the human moved carefully through the shadows. He crouched low, his steps light so the chains would not make sound. The girl's breath caught when he reached her side. She glanced around nervously, afraid of hidden eyes. He sat close enough that she could hear his breathing. For a long time, neither spoke. Words were dangerous. Even whispers could travel in the stone halls. But finally, he leaned in, his voice rough but soft. "Tell me," he said. She froze, unsure. Her voice had grown weak after years of silence. No one had asked her anything in so long. "Tell what?" she whispered back. "Your story," he replied. Her heart pounded. She shook her head at first, unwilling. Talking about the past was like reopening wounds that had never healed, but his gaze was steady, waiting, patient. Against her own fear, she found herself speaking. At first, the words came slow, broken. She told him of her home, a place far from the mines where the skies glowed with silver moons. She told him of the day soldiers came, of fire and screaming, of chains on her wrists. Her family had been taken too, but she had not seen them again. Every night, she still wondered if they were alive, or if the mines had claimed them long ago. As she spoke, her hands trembled and her throat burned. She had buried these memories deep, trying to survive without them. But now they spilled out like water from a cracked jar. The human listened in silence. He did not interrupt, did not pity, only clenched his fists when she described the punishments. His jaw tightened when she told him about the other girls who never returned from the guards' chambers. Tears rolled down her face before she realized it. She wiped them quickly, ashamed. But he touched her wrist gently, shaking his head. "Don't hide," he whispered. "You are alive. That means they did not win." The words made her chest ache. Alive. She had never thought of it that way. To her, surviving had always felt like a curse. But the way he said it, it sounded like victory. Then he told her his story. His voice was low, almost like a growl in the dark. He had come from a faraway world called Earth. He had once been free, but was captured during a raid and thrown into the mines like the rest. Unlike others, he had not broken. He had sworn he would find a way out, even if it took years. He admitted it was almost hopeless, but his eyes burned with the kind of fire she had never seen. Her breath caught when he leaned closer and whispered, "I won't die here, and neither will you." The girl shook her head quickly, fear rushing back. "Escape is impossible," she whispered. The words came out sharp, almost desperate. "No one leaves. No one ever leaves." "Someone has to," he replied firmly. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of unshakable truth. His certainty frightened her more than the guards. She had seen what happened to those who tried. They were caught, dragged back, beaten until their screams broke the silence for hours. Some never returned. The mines were a cage without doors. To dream of freedom was dangerous. But as she looked into his eyes, a part of her wanted to believe. Against her will, hope crept into her chest, like a flame refusing to die. The days that followed became different. They still worked under the lash, still carried stones until their muscles screamed, still coughed on the dust. But now, in the shadows, they shared secrets. The human taught her small things: how to listen for the guards' footsteps before they appeared, how to hide food under loose rocks, how to loosen chains without noise. Each detail was a spark, small but powerful. She felt herself growing stronger, not in her body, but in her heart. At night, they mapped the tunnels in whispers. The human had been watching, memorizing every turn, every locked gate, every guard's path. She stared at him in awe, wondering how he had managed such planning while everyone else was too broken to think beyond the next moment. He was different. He was not a slave in his mind, and now he was pulling her into his vision. One night, she asked him the question that had been burning in her chest. "Why me?" He looked at her, surprised. "You risk food, water, punishment, for me. Why?" For a moment he was silent. Then he said simply, "Because you still fight, even if you don't see it." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to deny it, to say she was weak and broken. But deep inside, she knew he was right. She had wanted to live. She had taken his bread. She had told him her story. Somewhere in her heart, the fight had never died. She turned her face away, hiding the tears that came again. He did not touch her this time. Did not need to. His words had already reached her. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she dreamed not of chains, but of open skies. For the first time, her dream was not only of herself, but of walking beside him into the light. She woke with fear still in her chest, but also something stronger. A new thought. A dangerous thought. Maybe escape was not impossible. Maybe, with him, freedom could be more than a dream. The night was thick with silence when the chance finally came. The guards were drunk, celebrating something in their quarters. Their shouting echoed faintly through the tunnels, their laughter rough and careless. For once, the heavy boots were not patrolling near the slave chambers. The girl sat with her knees drawn up, her heart pounding. She could feel it. The air was different, charged with something dangerous. The human leaned close to her, his whisper sharp and urgent. Now. Her body froze. For weeks he had whispered plans, traced paths in the dirt with his finger, taught her how to stay quiet and hidden. But she had never truly believed the night would come. Now it was here. Her chains rattled softly as she stood, her legs trembling. Fear pressed against her chest like iron, but his hand gripped hers, warm and firm. "Trust me," he said. They moved into the tunnels, shadows among shadows. The slaves around them lay sleeping, too broken to notice. The girl's feet barely touched the ground as they ran, her breath loud in her ears. Every sound, the dripping water, the echo of stones shifting, felt like a warning. She expected at any moment to hear the bark of a guard, the crack of a whip, the alarm that would doom them both. The human led her quickly, his memory of the mine clear and sharp. They slipped past corners where guards usually stood, now empty. The girl's eyes darted everywhere, her body tense like a hunted animal. The closer they came to the outer tunnels, the more her hope grew, and the more her terror swelled. Freedom was so close it felt unreal. Then the alarm shattered the silence. A sharp, screaming sound filled the tunnels. The girl stumbled, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that sound too well. Someone had seen them. The human cursed under his breath, pulling her faster. Their chains clanged against the stone floor, echoing like thunder. Behind them came shouts, boots pounding, weapons clattering. The mine had awakened. Her lungs burned as they ran. She wanted to collapse, to hide, but his grip dragged her forward. "Don't stop," he barked, his voice fierce. She forced her legs to move, each step heavier than the last. The tunnels blurred around her, every twist and turn a dizzy maze. She had spent years here, but tonight they looked different, alive with danger. They burst into a wide passage where carts of ore were stored. The human pushed one over, sending rocks crashing to the floor. The noise roared through the tunnel, blocking their pursuers for a moment. He pulled her toward the far exit, his eyes fixed forward like steel. But as they neared the gate, figures stepped out of the shadows. Guards. 3 of them, armed with electrified batons, blocking the way. Their eyes burned with rage, their voices full of mocking laughter. One pointed at the girl, sneering in his harsh tongue. She understood enough. The little rat thinks she can escape. Her body shook, her knees giving way. This was it. This was how every escape ended, with chains and blood. She wanted to scream, to beg him to let her go and save himself. But before she could speak, the human stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. The guards advanced, their batons sparking in the dim light. The human's fists clenched, his shoulders squared. He looked smaller than them, weaker, but his eyes burned with something the girl had never seen in anyone here. He did not look like a slave. He looked like a fighter. The first guard lunged forward, swinging his baton. The human caught the strike on his forearm, grunting with pain, then drove his fist into the guard's jaw. The alien stumbled back, stunned. The girl gasped, her heart pounding. She had never seen anyone strike a guard, let alone knock one off balance. The second came at him from the side, but the human ducked low, grabbed a loose chain from the ground, and whipped it across the guard's legs. The alien crashed down with a roar of anger. The girl pressed against the wall, her body frozen. Every instinct told her to hide, but her eyes were locked on him. He fought like a storm, wild and unyielding. The third guard charged straight at the girl, his baton raised. Her scream tore from her throat, but before the strike fell, the human tackled him. They both hit the ground hard, the baton skittering away. The alien rolled on top, snarling, his hands closing around the human's throat. The girl's vision blurred with panic. She could not just watch. Her hands fumbled for something, anything. Her fingers closed around a broken chain left on the ground. Her whole body shook as she lifted it. With a cry she did not recognize as her own, she swung it down on the guard's head. The sound rang through the tunnel. The alien collapsed to the side, stunned. The human coughed, dragging in air, then scrambled to his feet. His eyes met hers for a brief second, and she saw pride flicker in them. "Good," he rasped. 2 of the guards lay groaning, the third unconscious. The human grabbed her hand again, pulling her forward. "Now!" They ran past the bodies, through the gate, into the outer tunnel. The air smelled different here, fresher, cooler. The girl's chest tightened. She could almost feel the outside world beyond the stone walls. She could almost taste freedom. But behind them, more voices shouted, more boots thundered. The mine was fully awake now. Their victory had bought them only minutes. As they stumbled into the night air, under a sky she had not seen in years, her heart raced with both terror and wonder. The stars glittered above like distant fire. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees on the rocky ground. Tears spilled down her face as she gasped for breath. She had thought she would never see the sky again. The human knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Not yet," he said. His voice was steady, even as the shouts grew louder behind them. Not free yet, but close. She looked at him through her tears, her chest heaving. For the first time, she believed. Freedom was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was waiting, if they could survive the night. The night sky stretched wide above them, filled with stars, but there was no time to stop and look. The sound of pursuit thundered from behind, shouts and boots echoing through the rocky paths. The girl stumbled, her chest burning, but the human pulled her forward, his grip tight and steady. "Run," he said, his voice rough, almost broken from breath, but filled with strength. She forced her legs to move, even when every muscle begged her to collapse. They darted through jagged rocks and narrow trails. The chains around her ankles slowed her, clattering against stone, cutting into her skin. She cried out as she fell, scraping her hands against the ground. For a moment, she thought she would be left behind. But the human turned back, lifting her to her feet. His arm wrapped around her waist, carrying part of her weight as they ran together. Her heart pounded with fear, but also something else, something that made her keep going even when her body screamed to stop. The glow of torches flickered in the distance. Guards were closing in, their voices carried through the wind, shouting orders, promising pain. The human's eyes scanned the path ahead. Then he pulled her into a hidden gap between two boulders. They pressed against the cold stone, holding their breath as shadows moved across the ground. The girl's body shook, her heart thudding so loudly she thought it would give them away. The human pressed a finger to his lips. She nodded, clutching her chains to stop their rattling. The guards passed, their torches lighting the trail. The human waited until the last footsteps faded, then motioned for her to follow. They crept from the rocks, moving quickly but quietly. Every step felt like a stolen moment. Every breath was borrowed time. They reached the edge of the mining compound. Ahead stood the outer fence, tall and lined with cruel spikes. Beyond it stretched the wilderness, unknown, dangerous, but free. The girl's chest filled with hope at the sight, but before she could take a step, a sharp whistle split the air. A search party had spotted them. Torches flared, weapons raised. The guards stormed toward them, faster than the girl thought possible. Her body froze in terror. But the human stepped forward, his jaw set, his fists clenched. He grabbed a fallen piece of metal pipe from the ground, holding it like a weapon. His body shook with exhaustion, but his eyes blazed like fire. The first guard charged. The human swung the pipe, striking with a crack that echoed through the night. The guard fell, but another rushed in, slamming him against the rocks. The girl screamed as sparks from an electrified baton lit the darkness. The human grunted in pain but twisted, wrenching the baton free and striking back. He moved with fury, each strike wild but filled with desperate strength. The girl's breath came fast. She could not just stand and watch. Her eyes darted to the ground until she found a loose chain. She grabbed it, her hands trembling, and swung it at a guard who reached for her. The chain wrapped around his arm, and she yanked with all her strength. He stumbled, and she struck again, this time across his face. The guard roared, blood darkening his cheek. She gasped, realizing what she had done. For the first time, she had fought back. The battle was chaos, shouts, strikes, sparks, and blood. The human fought like an animal cornered, his body taking blows but never falling. He smashed the pipe into one guard, then spun to block another. The girl struck again and again with her chain, fear turning into a strange, fierce determination. Together, they created a storm of resistance, but more guards poured into the clearing. The girl's heart sank. There were too many. She looked at the human, fear filling her eyes. He was bleeding from his arm, his chest rising and falling sharply, but his gaze never wavered. He stepped in front of her, shielding her body with his own. "No," she whispered, clutching his arm. "They'll kill you." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then we fight." The words sent shivers through her. Not "I fight," but "we fight." He did not see her as weak, not as a burden. For the first time in her life, someone saw her as part of the battle. The guards rushed them together. The human roared, swinging the pipe with all his strength. She screamed, swinging her chain. The clash was brutal. Fists, metal, sparks. She felt the sting of a baton strike her side, but she did not stop. She fought through the pain, her voice breaking into wild cries. For years, her body had been used, broken, enslaved. Tonight, it was her weapon. At last, the human smashed the pipe against the gate's lock. The metal shrieked, sparks flying, until the lock cracked. He kicked it open, shoving the gate wide. The guards shouted, but for a moment they held back, stunned by the madness of it. The human grabbed her hand again, blood smearing between their fingers. "Run!" They sprinted through the open gate, stumbling into the wild. Behind them, the guards' voices rose in fury, but the night swallowed their cries. The air outside was sharp, filled with scents of earth and wind she had not known in years. The ground was rough beneath her feet, but every step felt lighter than the chains she had carried all her life. They did not stop until they collapsed on a ridge, the mine a distant glow behind them. The girl fell to her knees, gasping, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. Tears spilled down her face as she looked up at the sky. The stars shone brighter here, endless and vast. For years, she had thought she would die without ever seeing them again. Now they were above her, clear and free. The human dropped beside her, blood running down his arm, his chest heaving. He leaned back against the rocks, eyes closing for a moment. She reached for him, her hand hovering before finally resting on his. His skin was warm, trembling, but alive. For the first time, she felt something powerful rise in her chest. Not just relief, not just hope. Strength. The human had fought with everything he had, and she had fought too. Together, they had broken the unbreakable. She whispered through her tears, her voice shaking but full of fire. "We are free." The human opened his eyes, meeting hers. His lips curved into a faint smile, his voice low and steady. Not free yet, but close. Close enough to never stop. And as the night wind swept around them, carrying the scent of freedom, the girl realized that the chains inside her heart had finally shattered. The first light of dawn touched the sky when they finally slowed their steps. The long night of running, hiding, and fighting had left their bodies broken and raw. The girl's legs trembled with every step, her chains cutting into her skin, but she refused to stop. The human walked beside her, his arm bloodied and torn. Yet his eyes stayed sharp, scanning the horizon for danger. They reached a small clearing where the trees opened, and for the first time in years, she saw the sunrise. The golden light spilled over the land, painting the ground in warmth. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed into the grass. It was soft beneath her, nothing like the cold stone floors of the mine. Tears rushed into her eyes before she could stop them. She pressed her hands into the soil, feeling the living earth, and whispered through trembling lips, "It's real. I'm free." The human crouched beside her, breathing heavily. His body sagged with exhaustion, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, but he smiled faintly at her words. She looked at him through her tears, and the weight of what he had done struck her fully. He had risked everything. He had bled for her, fought for her, carried her through the night. He had not needed to. She was just one broken girl among many. Yet he had chosen her. Her chest tightened as she realized how much that choice meant. No one had ever chosen her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen more than a slave, more than a weak link in a chain. But he had. He saw her as worth saving. The wind blew gently across the clearing. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. The warmth of the sun touched her face, and for a moment she felt like a child again, running through fields under silver moons. But the scars on her arms reminded her of the years stolen. Her body trembled as memories clawed back. Whips, chains, the laughter of guards. She hugged herself, shivering even in the sunlight. The human noticed. He sat closer, his voice low. "You are safe now," he said. His tone was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. He knew freedom was not so simple. The chains outside could be broken, but the ones inside ran deeper. She looked at him, her lips parting. Words trembled on her tongue. "I don't know how to be free," she whispered. He did not answer right away. He reached down, picking up a handful of soil, letting it fall slowly between his fingers. "One step at a time," he said at last. "Freedom is not running from chains. It's walking towards something better. And you don't walk alone." Her throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, ashamed of the tears streaking her cheeks. Yet his words stayed in her chest, burning warm against the cold shadows. They rested a while in the clearing, listening to the distant shouts fading into silence. The guards would still be hunting, but the farther they ran, the weaker the grip of the mine became. The human cleaned his wounds with water from a small stream, and the girl knelt beside him, helping with shaking hands. She tore pieces of her ragged dress to bind his arm. He winced, but did not stop her. As she wrapped the cloth around his skin, she whispered, "Why me?" Her voice cracked. "You could have escaped alone. You would have moved faster, fought less, bled less." He looked at her, his jaw tightening, but his eyes soft. "Because you deserve more than chains," he said simply. Her hands froze, the cloth half tied. No one had ever said those words to her. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling unevenly. In that moment, the years of darkness in her heart cracked and light slipped through. She could barely breathe under the weight of it. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces. The girl stood slowly, her legs weak, but her back straighter than before. She looked at the horizon stretching wide, a land unknown, filled with danger and mystery. Fear whispered inside her, telling her she would be caught again, that suffering would never end. But beside her stood the human, solid and steady. His presence was like a wall against the storm. She took a deep breath. "Where do we go?" she asked. "Forward," he said, pointing toward the distant hills. "Far from here, as far as it takes." Her lips trembled into the faintest smile. Forward. A word she had never dared to think. She took his hand, her fingers curling around his, not in desperation this time, but in choice. His grip tightened, strong and reassuring. Together, they began walking toward the horizon. Every step hurt. Every sound in the trees made her flinch. But with each step, the girl felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just a slave running from her chains. She was someone moving toward life, toward tomorrow. As they climbed a hill, the wind lifted her hair, carrying away the dust of the mines. She looked back one last time. The smoke from the mine rose in the distance, a dark stain on the horizon. For years, that place had been her world, her cage. Now it was only a shadow behind her. She turned away, her heart steady. The human walked beside her, his pace strong despite his wounds. She looked at him and whispered, almost to herself, "You didn't just save me, you gave me a future." He glanced at her, his lips curving into a tired smile. "And you fought for it. Don't forget that." Her eyes stung, but this time the tears felt different. Not from pain, not from fear, but from something new. Strength. As the sun rose higher, lighting the path ahead, the girl felt her first true breath of freedom. She was scarred, fragile, and still afraid, but she was no longer broken. The human had given her more than escape. He had given her the chance to believe in herself again. And as they walked together into the new day, she knew the chains of the past could never hold her again.